how did I manage scope in LD1? And also, I'm just going to go into LD2 and further, just because I think it's in general. One thing I learned in LD1 that was really useful and how I was able to manage scope. When I started working on Half-Life, I told myself I'm not going to overscope myself. And I did. There's a moment when you're looking at your production schedule and how much time you have to complete things. And I was running through a task list in my head, and I was like, I know I have to do this, this, that, this. And I felt in my gut, genuinely, just like, there's not time for this. Everything I need to do is perfect the first time I do it, or it's not going to happen. If you feel that, you're overscoped. If you feel at any point that you have an abundant amount of time, you're probably perfectly scoped, because things are gonna go wrong, and you're gonna have to readjust based on feedback. And that takes so much more time than you would ever think. So the minute you think, oh, I might be on timing, you're overscoped. Cut it.
So when it comes to managing scope, I've actually been on the less frequent side. I've been on scope and I've been slightly under scope. And normally slightly under scope means you're on scope. And if you're slightly over scope, that also means you're on scope, because the line is very thin. And from my perspective, it is safer to be slightly under scoped. That way you give yourself more time to fix what's there, because things are going to go wrong. It's just how it happens. If you're slightly over scoped, the professors tend to like that because it gives them more to work with, and they can focus down on your stronger aspects, because you're going to end up cutting things. So you can take a larger idea and refine it. So it really comes down to your preference. Do you want to refine, or do you want to take the time to work through what you already have and make it better?
Yeah, absolutely. Scope was definitely keeping things in scope was definitely one of my more difficult challenges, especially in LD1 early on, so don't get super discouraged if that's a problem for you as well. Because finding that right mix of enough content to keep it deep, but also not so much that you're, blowing things way out of proportion for this specific assignment is such a difficult balance to strike. But I typically find it easier to scale up than scale down. And I know they say it's very easy to, make a big project and scale back, but then you have to start making cuts and things like that. And then to me, it never seems more cohesive. And I obviously get attached to my ideas once I actually, flesh them out. So it's harder and harder to cut. So I think my advice is scope a little bit down than what you think it is early on, but obviously check in with Prof.O. or whatever professor you have very frequently early on, because nailing that scope early is very important and will serve you really well later on in the project. Because if you have the scope and the scale of your project down early, then that means that you don't have to remake or make major cuts once you've actually built the level itself. So when you're still in the documentation and the idea phase, talk to the professor, make a meeting and stuff like that, and just talk about, this is my idea, it'll be around this big, here's sort of the general idea of this map and everything. And then they'll give you feedback of whether or not, oh, okay, so I think that this is massively overscoped, or it's like you need to add a little more. Either way, doing this stuff early on will serve you so well in the later milestones once you actually start building an editor. But I think my advice for a lot of these questions is going to be do a lot of early legwork, because things pile up as you start going through the milestones.
For keeping things in scope, I tend to think about it in terms of how much time I have available. All of the stuff in my plan that I want to do I consider is all good. These are all good things that I could do, but maybe I only have the weekend to do them. So I try and pick out the most important stuff and then do that and see how much time I have left, and then just keep repeating that process. What's the next most important thing? I'm going to do that and then see how much time I still have left to keep going. That's kind of how I tackle scope.
For keeping things in scope, it's kind of this balance where you don't want to be underscoped, you don't want to be overscoped. You want to be just kind of right in the middle. And that looks different for every project. And Prof.O. or whoever your level design professor is will provide project parameters. So you kind of have to know, okay, what's my skill set? I might not be the best at like programming AI or building architecture, but I'm really good with designing my levels and making the aesthetics really good. So you kind of have to know what your skill set is and balance accordingly. A good part for helping figure out what proper scope for you looks like, and it's different for everybody. Everybody has a different sense of scope. But what proper scope for you could look like is knowing, like, early on before you even start your level, how familiar am I with the tool? How good am I at knowing how to program this AI, knowing how to build these structures, knowing how to get the gameplay, the aesthetics, everything in, can really help give you a baseline level of knowledge of this is how much time this is going to take. So let me build a level within scope and within that's realistic for me to accomplish within the amount of time.